Hi, my name is Shabazz Rah-Khem, Senior Manager for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and I would like to discuss working to disrupt unconscious bias in the workplace. What is unconscious bias? Judgments often based on prejudice, unsupported thoughts, or stereotypes as a result of pre-existing knowledge structures in our brains, used to interpret incoming information about a person or groups of people quickly based on what or who we see. These judgments are superficial determinations on who or what is likable, safe, valuable, right, or competent. And unfortunately, we are all susceptible to it. The impact of unconscious bias. And I'd like to quote Maya Angelou: prejudice is the burden that confuses the past, threatens the future, and renders the present inaccessible. We may encounter many defeats, but we must not be defeated. Unconscious bias. These baseline decisions impact how we see people. They are influenced by society. They affect claimed objective observation. Bias can come from an array of source information that we haven't critically thought out. Many unconscious biases are directed towards groups, including but not limited to race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, religion, disabilities, education, national origin, military status, mental health, skills, and socioeconomic status. The complexity of bias is even more elevated by intersectionality or combinations of characteristics. Let's review some common biases. In-group, out-group bias occurs when we give preferential treatment to people we perceive as being in our inner group. These can be things such as same race, political views, gender, identity, level, education background, or age, religion affiliations, military status, etc. Confirmation bias, seeking or interpreting evidence that supports existing beliefs, expectations, or hypotheses. It's a way of trying to further establish preconceived notions that fail to apply critical thinking when attempting to confirm a point of view. Basically, relying on single source data information again and again. Shared information bias. Team members spend far more time discussing shared information rather than sharing information that only they might have access to and that might advance their project further. Broken communication, not using information to strengthen all team members' understanding to empower their decision making, at times used to stump people rather than help them. Stereotyping, generalizations about groups of people that don't take into account individual differences. Surface assumptions and classifying others based on broad sweeping grouping that loses sight of the uniqueness of individuals. Halo or horn effect occurs when a person is judged positively or negatively based on one trait or behavior. Automatic judgments positively or negatively towards others, connecting unrelated traits without much evidence. Scant bits of behaviors furthering a good or bad image. Groupthink or social cohesion occurs when we set aside our personal beliefs, stay quiet when we disagree, or adopt the opinion of the group to maintain harmony. Failing to develop a climate of inclusion that allows all team members to have comfort in sharing. Loss aversion, preferring to avoid loss over the opportunity for potential gain. Foregoing potential innovative methods by not establishing healthy disagreement or taking an obvious path due to an aversion to explore unknowns. Authority bias, tendency to assign greater weight and accuracy to opinions based on positions of authority, regardless of the context. Lacking factual or supporting data, accepting the opinion of a person merely because they hold a higher level and role. Unconscious bias influences our decisions and interactions with others even when in direct opposition to our espoused's beliefs, and in some cases, in direct opposition to our own experiences. Why is that? Because unconscious bias plays out unconsciously, meaning we aren't cognizant of how it influences our decision making and behaviors. It's not like outright displays of racism, which most people would condemn. We are complicit in unconscious bias. It creeps into how we rate team members, weigh and judge whether to seek out disciplinary actions, or provide opportunities for employees' growth and development. But we can take concrete steps to disrupt bias, strengthening the likelihood our decisions and behaviors are rational, considering facts rather than based upon unconscious bias. How do we go about disrupting unconscious bias? It all starts with the I. As human beings, we want to categorize everything, and I mean everything. It's a natural process in thinking. We do it when we first introduced to information about a person. Sensory process data. It doesn't matter if it's a resume, promo doc, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. We instantly start processing information, making quick mental assumptions prior to getting to know a person. Hence, countering bias requires us to be self critical, self aware, and openly challenge our thinking. Be willing to critique your thinking and behaviors. Ask, would I have thought or done the same had that person been more aligned to how I identify myself? This is a small step in practice to address bias. Additionally, when we identify bias, we need to name it. Name it strengthens the personal system of checking our thinking and behaviors to reduce bias presence. Next, build empathy. Tap your own vulnerabilities, pain, and struggles, especially experiences where others attempted to impose their narrative or thinking upon you, and work from there. I'd like to also quote Angela Davis. You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. Nothing changes if I don't acknowledge potential bias in my thinking. I have to ask whys about how I came to quick conclusions with certain people. I have to be willing to call out any biased actions not aligned with my best self in order to grow and change. Use a blind system. Focus on just the data, metrics, results, and performance without dwelling on the individual. Then ask, how would I assess these points if it were me? Step out the vacuum. Don't work in isolation. Be collaborative in decisions and information. Ask for input from different people to gain perspectives. Be disciplined and just listen. Then think about the applicable policies, processes, and procedures and whether they were followed. Step outside the decision or behavior. Be courageous. Name or call it potential bias until you can demonstrate otherwise. Begin by acknowledging unconscious bias may exist and ask others to provide real talk feedback. If you don't have a colleague or friend that can do that, get one fast. Build trusting relationships. We can't rely on our own increased awareness alone to make a difference. We need to get external thoughts into the process, and it really shouldn't be someone closely aligned in thinking because that's more the same. We need a counterpoint to disrupt bias or skewed behavior, helping us proactively unpack situations from an impartial front. If you're not to that point yet, design a makeshift system that forces you to challenge instinctive responses. Prior to responding in situations, force a pause, make determined redirects, seek out alternative information that counter what you're basing a decision on. This structure allows you to monitor the in the moment bias. Next steps. Start sharing your stories on catching your unconscious bias. Shared experience empowers by driving home the point we all harbor unwanted, unconscious bias, and we all need help monitoring our behavior to keep us on track. This is part of breaking down the stigma and fear and addressing uncomfortable conversations. Helping one another. Try intervention. There aren't clear methods to disrupt bias because context, how it was presented, or commingled with other information can make it difficult to pinpoint at times. That's why it's helpful to approach all situations politely when exploring in the moment statements or actions which project bias or isolating tone. Be certain to clearly identify statements or actions. Share insight. What you said made me think of something I learned recently, and share an article or research or facts. Consider impact. I know you have good intent, but that comment sends an unintentional message that I don't think you mean to relay to others. Highlight underlying unintended messages. I'm hearing some assumptions in that statement that reflect unconscious bias we've all been exposed to, and then spell it out. Thinking it through. I know you don't want to communicate that, so let's discuss how that message can be perceived. Can we talk more about some of the ways of thinking that leads to people saying that a lot? I like to quote Harvey Milk. It takes no compromise to give people their rights. It takes no money to respect the individual. It takes no political deal to give people freedom, and it takes no survey to remove repression. As leaders, be disruptors. Be a force of change, shaking up our old ways of thinking, behaving, acting, and doing business. Interrupt the status quo to force new ways of behaving, provoke the best self. We have to be conduits in service to others, leveraging intelligent persuasion to inspire our best self. That's part of being a people leader, having the courage to disrupt bias, bigotry, and ignorance, while being self critical to assure we are being thoughtful and objectively fair. And that is how we can start the conversation of disrupting bias. It's all with one and then the many. Again, my name is Shabazz Rah-Khem, Senior Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Thank you.